Welcome back. My name is Prajnamanas, if we haven't met, and hello to you online at home. I'm going to start with a verse. I'll read it twice. Long is the night to the wakeful, long the league to one who is exhausted. Long is the process of faring through repeated existences to those spiritually immature ones who do not know the real truth. Long is the night to the wakeful, long the league to one who is exhausted. Long is the process of faring through repeated existences to those spiritually immature ones who do not know the real truth. Okay, that's from the Dhammapada, which is thought to be some of the oldest recorded sayings of the Buddha. What I mean is it's one of the oldest traditional texts that records what he's thought to have said to his disciples. And that's a verse about how weary and painful it is, in his view, to keep going through life after life, birth after birth, and death after death, which of course in the traditional Buddhist perspective that we've been exploring in this series is what we're all doing. You can debate the metaphysics of it very finely. I don't know if we've managed that, but I think we've sort of indicated some of the extreme views that Buddhism's not occupying, and some of what it is saying about what it usually calls rebirth or rebecoming, which is basically saying that consciousness, until it's completely liberated, i.e. enlightened, as in a Buddha, is struggling and reforming, taking a body again, and perpetuating an unsatisfied tendency in itself in the world, and in the Buddhist view, seeking rebirth again and again. And partly I've started the talk with that to show that this kind of concern that's particularly relevant to what we're going into tonight, which is the Bardos, or in-between state, I'll say more about what that means, is completely, it goes all the way back to the Buddha. The time and place in which the Buddha was teaching was completely clear that there are many, many lives. Again, I don't tonight want to go into what that means and doesn't mean. You could look at the previous talks in this series if you're interested and weren't here. But the religious environment in which he was operating, actually the day-to-day environment in which he was operating, just assumed that this particular life that I identify with has this particular body, started in such and such a year, will finish, is not everything that I will experience. And of course you can even question whether I experience it in any consistent way at all, because I'm always changing. So the most pat contemporary equivalent of this is that stat that came out years ago about how all the cells in your body have replaced themselves within 7 years. Did you get told that at school? Well, no, yes, some no. We did. People were very excited about it at the time. All of the cells in your body have replaced themselves within a maximum cycle of 7 years. Anyway, it's just another way of saying, the human being, or any being, is just pure flux, really. Is always change. You can't identify any part of it that's fixed and staying the same, and that you can hold on to and sort of freeze and frame and protect in any ultimate, completely lasting sense. The mind is changing all the time. We often don't have that much control over it. The body, sooner or later, will deteriorate and die. And the traditional view, I keep saying traditional view, I shouldn't, because I pretty much agree with this, I think, myself. So it's my view too, I just know less about it than the Buddha did. Is that something continues, I think, until it is completely liberated. And that something is, I don't know if it's consciousness itself or in consciousness, it all gets very fiddly with the words. But I just wanted to evoke, at the beginning of this talk, which I've called the temptations of the Bardo, that process, as the Buddha puts it, of faring through repeated existences is unpleasant and undesirable and painful and tiring. So that's where you get quite different things in different traditions. If people are talking about reincarnation, or I don't actually know that much about how other traditions talk about it, but sometimes people refer to this as if it's a good thing. And it might be that there's more to learn and more to refine, but the goal of Buddhist practice actually is to get off the wheel, as it's sometimes referred to, even the endless round, it's also called, which means going round and round, having one life after another, not managing to learn quite enough to stop the process and be completely freed. And that's what a Buddha has done, is become completely freed of that cycle. Hence, Buddhas are represented beautiful, often golden, like this, deeply composed, because, a Buddha who is living still has a body, but the Buddha used to say things like, "Now there is no more birth for me," as in he was clear it was not going to happen again, which doesn't tell you what happens to the consciousness of a Buddha, which is a whole other set of talks. It doesn't mean it disappears or is cut off. The metaphor of nirvana, which means extinguishing, for which a symbol is often a candle that's been blown out, would have been very, very inspiring to people who saw the issues, the problems in life as a kind of fire that you were trying to put out. They often said desire. They probably meant something more like what we refer to as craving, because desire sounds to us probably good, or at least some of the time, doesn't it? If you say craving, you can hear already that's probably something sounds kind of nasty, craving, doesn't it? I mean, I know we all do it, but it's got an unpleasant sound to it. So that candle that's been blown out and the metaphor of nirvana, that would have been very inspiring to people who were trying to put out the fire of the passions, as they also referred to it, and stop that process of burning up that's just going on and on and on otherwise, and is not allowing us to break through into a deeper awareness of the pattern that's causing that, and hence how to stop it. It so happens for us, I think a lot of the time, that something like putting out a candle doesn't look or sound or feel very inspiring. Again, you'd have to refer to some of the previous talks. I think that's probably because of the nihilism that subtly found its way into our culture. It might be a kind of post-death of God thing, if you see what I mean. We now are real warriors. There's nothing at all after death. It's like complete oblivion, which for some reason is the scariest thing, even though there won't be anything to experience or anyone to experience it. You see what I mean? It nonetheless inspires a lot of fears. It's got contradictions in it. We probably need metaphors that are, more like liberation. And the Buddha used metaphors that were very, very positive sounding. There's a sutta that's a whole list of, I think they're called epithets for nirvana. Things like the cool cave, or the island in the storm, or rest from work, which I particularly like. Yoga-kema means rest from work. So I think there might be 32 for some reason. There often seem to be multiples of 4 in Buddhism. I don't know why. Anyway, he gives 32 epithets for enlightenment, and a lot of them are very beautiful and very positive. So bear that in mind. But the context of this stuff we've been looking at is that rebirth is undesirable. Anyway, that much is probably clear by now. So why am I talking about this? Well, who's been here in previous weeks of the series? I know some of you have. Quite a lot of you. Good. So we've had a big ugly image over there, haven't we? The Wheel of Life, gripped onto by Yama, the Lord of Death, with his claws and his teeth. And it had in the middle the 6 realms of sentient existence. So the 6... realms. I think realm is probably the best word, because it's not clear whether it's a physical place or more like a sort of potential for a certain type of experience. So realm is probably the best word. There's 6 realms that you could be reborn into. So we discussed the fact that consciousness probably continues and it lands in one of those. Now tonight we're getting to the place between those 2 things. So we've looked in particular at 4 of the realms, and why, although they've all got, they've all got potential, and they've all got understandable traits like, aggressiveness in the Titan realm. Probably a lot of us can relate to that. bit of delusion in the God realm, thinking that pleasures will last. All of them are mundane, and that's the really important thing about the 6 realms. They don't offer in themselves any escape from that level of existence. Let me quote Kuslasara, who I thought put it very well last week. The 6 realms are directions of mind that attract us if we're not enlightened. Okay, so in the after-death state, which we'll look at more tonight, or the Bardo, we will go towards something that attracts us. It could be the God realm, where there's lots of pleasure and aesthetic enjoyment, and maybe we've earned a birth there because we've meditated deeply, appreciated the arts, loved people very much, predominantly. Maybe we've only done a little bit of that, and we've done a lot of competing and aggressive sort of go-getting, and we'll become a titan instead, or a jealous god. Yeah? So we'll be attracted to those things. However, it can be transcended, and now we'll look at a particular point where there's the potential for that, and that is at death. So on our intensive retreat in a couple of weeks' time, we're looking at the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which, if you like, is the inspiration underneath all of this. And you may have come across it. It's a kind of manual for speaking into the ear of a dying or dead person, telling them what to look out for, what to do and not do. The Tibetan belief, I think, is that a consciousness has not left the body entirely, or you can't be sure until 49 days after what we think of as physical death. They think of as the initial signs of death or approaching death. So the Lama, or the spiritual friend, speaks these instructions into the ear of the dying person, really, really kind of exhorting them, even sometimes frankly nagging them, don't go towards one of the realms. Don't do it. Because the dying person is bewildered. The consciousness has become divorced from the body. It's never knowingly experienced that before. It doesn't remember that ever happening before. There's nothing more disorientating than that. And those of us, I suppose, lucky enough to still be on this side of that divide and who are trying to practice some awareness, know that person's consciousness will be in a bit of a panic. And the Lama is saying into the ear of this person, don't go towards the dull, smoky light. That's what keeps coming up again and again. Okay? In other words, don't go towards one of the realms. I'll come on in a bit to what it's saying we should do. But just to say a little more about this moment, our founder Sangharakshita has has coined this phrase, the crucial situation. The crucial situation. It's very good. I think it's probably liable to be a bit overused. It's not just like when your bus is a bit late or something and you're in a stress. I think it's when something's really critical or really difficult for you, and you really are challenged in a way probably that you weren't prepared for. The ultimate instance, of course, of that is death. So the belief expressed in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is that is a massive opportunity, nonetheless. Okay, so the more the stakes go up in the Dharma life, the more the potential there is for it to go wrong, and the more potential there is for it to go really right. If you see what I mean. So that's all just to say the territory we're not in here is the ordinary dull day-to-day, where we just slightly complacently carry on. I don't know about you, but personally I can relate to the fact that part of the issue with our practice is complacency. If you really do not have materially what you need day to day, that's not the issue, clearly. The issue is just getting by. But for a lot of us, a lot of the time, probably spiritually, the problem is that we kind of think we're basically all right. And we keep getting up and going to bed and eating and going to work and just assuming that everything's going to carry on fine. Until at some point, it just definitely doesn't. For a lot of people, that will be the shock of a bereavement, say. It could be something a bit slighter, like a serious breakup. After a long relationship, if people break up, They can feel like the ground's been taken away from beneath their feet, can't they? You think, who actually am I in this new situation? I don't know. And maybe just from those couple of examples, you can start to relate to the fact that you can kind of go downhill and avoid it. You sort of mean, and start reaching for the bottle or the pills or the whatever it is, and think, I've got to get away from this, in a complete panic. Those moments can also break open somebody's life and allow in growth really suddenly. They can be the start of the path of growth for a person, because this moment of the crucial situation probably always has at least an element of vision in it. So it's probably got panic and unfamiliarity. It's probably got at least the potential for some vision in it. I remember one of our senior order members, Subhuti, describing after his mother's death this element of the experience that was difficult to talk about. So it was deeply painful, of course, threw him around quite a lot. And at the same time, all along, he knew that there was some current of elation going on as well, and some sort of thrill and freedom. I don't think he'd mind me saying that, because he said it in this room and I was sitting somewhere over there. And I thought that's really interesting. Personally, my parents are both still alive, so I haven't been there yet. But I can really imagine. These things can put us just much more in touch with what is essential. A friend of mine some years ago, right when I was getting involved in the centre here, had a serious accident that she didn't recover from. She didn't exactly die, but she didn't recover. And of course, I was very, very sorry that happened. It's a very, very painful episode. But in my own life, I've sometimes missed that period. I've sometimes missed it because the weeks following that accident and the news and so on were so open-hearted. I mean, there's a lot of grief, obviously, and sometimes the pain, you sort of can hardly bear it. At the same time, I was so much more liable to tell people that I loved them, to thank them for things, to ask them for help if that's what I needed, to help them if I could perceive that they had a need for that. And in another sense, I was quite happy. So strange to say, strange to admit. And those levels are going on, well, kind of simultaneously, or they're kind of jostling for your attention. I don't know, taking it in turns or something, and it's intense, you know. But intense doesn't necessarily mean bad. I really believe that. So this word bardo means between two, and the ultimate instance of it is at death. But there are also moments in life that might rehearse us a little bit for the bardo, for that in-between state. Okay, you'll hear Buddhists say, "I'm in a bit of a bardo." They may or may not be exaggerating. I can't tell for sure. You'll have to judge for yourself. But a bardo probably doesn't last very long. It doesn't mean I'm stuck and I'm going to be indecisive for a few months. It probably means something familiar has been taken away and I don't know exactly who I am in that situation, but I'm able to stay with it. If all of those above qualities apply, the word bardo might be appropriate. The chief of all bardos is after death. Okay. Bhante Sangharakshita, our founder, says, "For a bardo experience to be possible in a strict sense, something must be taken away. You must lose something and be left suspended, hanging in the air without it." Okay. I'll just pause there and see if, because that's quite a bit to be getting on with. If you've got any questions about what I've said so far, I'll carry on in just a minute, but just want to check what I've said is clear.
Once the soul left the body, until it occupies the another form of physical body or whatever, where that soul will be staying.
Okay, so if it's all right, I'm going to replace the word soul with consciousness for now, partly because Buddhism actually, in a sense, directly refutes the idea of a soul and says that there isn't one. Because soul would suggest a fixed, unchanging element that survives death unchanged. What's happening here is something subtler, where something like a current of consciousness that's always changing becomes dissociated from a physical form that it has identified with in a delusive way. I know that's a lot of words, but what I mean there is my conscious experience is to do with the error of thinking, for example, that this body is mine and that the consciousness is seated in the body. Yeah. So that's exactly what we're going to look at now, actually, is what happens to the consciousness between births. So that's what I'll come on to now. So, good question. So what the Book of the Dead tells us is that the first thing that happens is that the consciousness is confronted with the nature of mind itself. So it meets absolute reality. So one of the very first things, I'll just show you a copy of the Book of the Dead so you know what this one looks like. Tibetan Book of the Dead, very famous thing. The actual manual is only about the middle third of that. It's not very long. The consciousness is confronted by the clear, by the nature of mind itself, and this is called, or the book says, consciousness of the deceased arises brilliantly as non-conceptual clear light. Okay, so it's quite funny because, well, not funny at all, but it's not what you'd expect, because right at the moment of death, absolute reality is presented to us entirely. I don't mean everything you can imagine sits before you. I mean that reality itself manifests in no form at all except clear light. Okay? And what the book keeps saying is that if you can recognise that as the nature of mind itself, you will be liberated on the spot, i.e. enlightened. And there's no more work to do, and you won't, to partly answer your question, you won't reach another birth, you won't need it, you won't want it. You will have realised that there is nothing to want it, and you'll merge with reality altogether, which is, as it says, is a completely non-conceptual state, but also a blissful one. Because the nature of mind, or the nature of reality, is awareness itself, the full potential of awareness, that's not a sort of death of consciousness or awareness, or it's not a blank nothingness, if you see what I mean. It's merging with reality so absolutely that there's nothing further to do, and it's blissful and aware and radiant, and other qualities it names. I'll just read you a little passage from that. Just to give you a little flavour of this very well-known text. So, I don't know if you can see this, you get two things in this book, several layers. About half of it is a narrative telling you, the spiritual friend, what to say to the dead person. And then when you get an indented bit like this, that's what you're to say to them, if you see what I mean. But the rest of it is saying, at this point, do this. At this point, lay them out in such and such a way. Speak very clearly into their ear, and so on. So the very first speech that you utter to the dead person goes like this. O child of enlightened nature, and you insert the name of the dying person. The time has now come for you to seek a path. As soon as your breath ceases, what is known as the clear light of the first Bardo, which your spiritual teacher introduced to you in the past, will manifest. As soon as respiration ceases, all phenomena will become empty and totally naked, a condition like space. At the same time, a naked, pure awareness that is neither inside nor outside of you will dawn, clear and empty, without centre or perimeter. At that moment, recognise this instant presence as your own nature and relax in that state. I also will introduce you to it at that time. So the main instruction there is just at the end. Recognise this instant presence as your own nature. There's a bit more to be said about that. So, let me find something Bante said. when it says it's your own nature, it doesn't mean that it's like you, the inside of Tyler's mind or Brian's mind or something, is projected out. You see that and realise that that's reality. It's more like the reverse. It's more like you realise that everything that you've experienced and that's experienceable partakes of the nature of reality in the end. And that reality doesn't have a form, but if you perceive it at all, it'd be something like a bright, clear light. And that all of the activity of our unenlightened consciousness has been some sort of obscuration of that. Is that clear enough? That what we're doing a lot of the time, and what causes our suffering, according to Buddhism, is obscuring reality by layering over it a conception basically of a fixed and separate self that needs defending, that has a particular sort of essential identity, and that ultimately doesn't change. We've layered that over and obscured it. Reality, in fact, is more like a naked, bright, clear light. It isn't saying that reality actually looks like that. It doesn't actually look like green mats and cushions and yellowish walls. It's saying that all of what you perceive is actually permeated by reality itself. So Bhante says, every individual thing in the universe continually transcends the limitations of its own individuality by reflecting in the depths of its being the image of every other living thing in the universe. That's quite sort of big idea, isn't it? It's saying everything partakes in the nature of reality, therefore is non-different from other elements in that reality in the end. Buddhism is very demanding because it's not a oneness either. So some spiritual traditions say that everything in the end is one. Buddhism's slightly more subtle and slightly more pedantic by saying it's actually not two. but it's also not one. You get whole texts that just refute statements to try to get, well, the Heart Sutra, who knows the Heart Sutra or has heard the Heart Sutra or recited the Heart Sutra? At least some of you must have done. Yeah. It's basically saying everything you try to grasp onto, every idea, forget that idea. So that particular fixed individual concepts no longer have any sort of play for you, and you can just course in a complete awareness that everything is really non-dual. This is, some of the clumsy terms you can put to what's happening at that first moment where the clear light manifests. And non-dualism, that's hopefully the last technical term I'll use, is a unique kind of vision. I think that's important, partly because when you go into it you realise how dualistic so many other views are. I'll just read a bit more from Bhante here. All systems of spiritual culture, he says, which are founded upon a dualistic philosophy, like good and evil, for example, ultimately create a split in the psyche, with the result that the total energy of the individual is expended in the exhausting struggles which are continually taking place between the higher and lower aspects of the personality, instead of being devoted exclusively to the realisation of nirvana. Here's one more conception of it that's a bit more poetic from Blake. He says, doesn't he, that in a particular vision you can see the world in a grain of sand, heaven in a wild flower, the universe in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. Very beautiful, isn't it? It goes to show you need poetry, so that you're not just fiddling with words like non-duality. Much more beautiful way of saying it, that the world is in a grain of sand. It's quite a mystic vision, that. It doesn't explain itself. It's just saying that everything ultimately is a reflection of everything else, because it all partakes of the true nature of awareness. And you can play, if it's the right moment for you, with the fact you can perfectly easily experience the fact that everything is made of awareness. Are you doing that now? Maybe some of you are doing that right now. nothing you can experience is made of anything except your awareness of it. So that's a tiny little experiential way into what this larger truth might be saying. But it's the hardest truth of all of them to grasp. So, at this point in the Bardo, we probably don't recognise that bright, clear light as the nature of our own mind, which is the nature of mind itself. So, what happens next? Does anyone know what happens next in the sequence? If we don't manage to recognise that bright, clear light.
See a Buddha figure? A Buddha figure, you see?
Yeah, Buddha figures start to appear. That's what the book says. So, in the sort of narrative, we've not recognised reality itself, probably because we hadn't trained ourselves quite enough. I know we do our best, but we might not be prepared enough for that moment. Okay? So even though the Lama is whispering in our ear and reminding us, we might just not know how to do that in the moment. Okay? And we panic, and we, as it were, go down a level. And this is going to happen a lot of times before we emerge in one of the realms, possibly. Okay? So at this point, in the sort of manual and in the after-death state, Buddha forms start to appear. So we've got Varochana on the shrine here tonight for two reasons. One is, we were really keen to finish the series with an image for the transcendental rather than an image for the mundane, which has been on there for the last 4 weeks. Secondly, because that's the first form that appears. It doesn't look like this particular canvas print, although it may look something like that. That's the Buddha Varochana, who, and this is relevant, whose body is white in colour. So this mandala of 5 Buddhas, their bodies are said to be made of light, and they are dressed in beautiful, regal silks and jewels, sitting deeply contented in meditation. Auras of different coloured lights are usually emanating from them, and they have particular symbols, associations, gestures, and so on. So that's the Buddha Varochana. And at the same time, a soft, smoky light also shines at us that's more tempting. So you start to get pairs of options. I'll just read from the book again. So this section of the book is called The Vision of the Peaceful Deities in the Intermediate State of Reality. First day. Now all of space manifests as blue light. On this first day of the intermediate state of reality, from the pure central realm called the pervasive sphere, blessed Vairochana, his body white in colour, will appear before you, seated on a lion throne, with a 5-pronged Vajra in his right hand and embraced by his supreme consort, Akashadat Vishvari. A blue light, radiant and clear, brilliant and scintillating, symbol of the wisdom of the expanse of reality that is the basic purity of your aggregate of consciousness, will issue from the hearts of Vairochana and his consort, shining piercingly towards your heart, so bright that your eyes cannot endure it. And that's important, that your eyes cannot endure it. Together with this light, a pallid white light, indicative of the realm of the gods, will also arise, glimmering before your heart. At that point, swayed by the power of negative past actions, you may want to flee in fear and terror from the bright blue light of the wisdom of the expanse of reality, and instead feel attracted to the dull white light of the God realms. Okay? So you've got these two choices appearing. One of them so bright you can hardly bear to look at it. The other one, on the basis of negative past actions, you may want to flee in fear towards. So it goes on. In that moment, do not be bewildered by the blue light, radiant and clear, brilliant and scintillating. It is the supreme clear light of wisdom. Do not be terrified, and so on. The book keeps telling you not to be afraid at these key moments, and that what's actually shining towards you is this brilliant clear light of wisdom, and if only you can open up to that, again, you will be liberated on the spot. There are 100 figures in the Book of the Dead. Virochana is figure number 1, there are 100. And I believe, I might be wrong, that each one represents the same potential for liberation, if you can recognise it as the nature of your own mind. Okay? I don't think there are 100 not so good options. I'm mainly aware of the 6 realms. But partly that's saying to us that we can't handle too much reality. And I think that's actually a familiar situation. So the book is clear that this is what happens after death. You'll get a pair of choices, one basically going towards enlightenment, the other basically going back towards the world, and you will choose between them. However, I think we probably know this also happens in our life, right down to the moment-to-moment life of the mind. If you started practicing meditation, you might already be familiar with the fact that when someone does something that rubs you up the wrong way, say, and it's a bit familiar, you can actually pause. Sometimes you can even feel your reaction starting to sort of boil up. A familiar irritation or story, you can actually observe that happen, and you've got a little bit of time. If you dive into it, you've run out of time. You've got a little bit of time to think, actually, do I want to do that? Do I want to go towards that, or shall I do something more creative? Shall I actually think of some sort of curious, interested, even loving, expressive thing to go into with this person, rather than feel irritated with them and just sort of get through the interaction somehow, if you see what I mean, which will actually just keep us on the wheel. You see what I mean? So there's moments all the time opening up where we could go towards something more creative, and the Book of the Dead is saying that will happen in its ultimate expression after death. Just briefly, what happens after this? Are people aware of the 5 Buddha mandala? Do you know about that? Mandala of 5 Buddhas? A few nods and some shakes. So, Virochana is the first of 5 Buddhas of the mandala. They're not Buddhas as in the historical Buddha that walked the earth. They're idealised Buddhas. So they are beautiful images, imaginative visions of the enlightened mind, and they each have a colour, lots and lots of other associations. So if you don't recognise Virochana, but you manage not to go to the God realm either, there's a third thing which might happen, which is you go to the next figure, who is, anyone know? Akshobhya, the blue Buddha. And another realm will open up, another set of possibilities, another light of wisdom shining from the Buddha's heart, so bright that your eyes can't bear to look at it, and the temptation of being reborn in another realm. Eventually, the figures start getting less peaceful and less beautiful. So this, if you like, is the first refraction of that naked, clear light of reality into form. And the tradition says that that form is taking that reality is taking a form that we might recognise. It looks like a person, it's deeply benevolent, we might feel attracted to it, because that's part of what we can relate to. So we want to go towards this beautiful Buddha figure. That reality starts to get refracted more and more as you go through the colours, Buddhas of blue and red and yellow and so on. And if we don't recognise those, we start getting to figures that are less peaceful. You go to a set of figures called the Vidyadharas, or bearers of awareness. Eventually you get to wrathful Buddhas who do not look beautiful and peaceful at all. Anyone seen wrathful Buddha images? Have people come across those? 1 or 2? If you travel to the Buddhist East, you might see these in temples sometimes. People might have them as meditation aids. We don't teach these meditations because you probably need a lot of equipment to actually understand what they're trying to say. Because these ugly, wrathful Buddhas, I'll just give you a flavour of that. So this one's called Great Glorious Buddha Herika, blazing in a mass of light, his body blackish-brown in colour, with 3 heads, 6 arms and 4 legs planted apart. His face is white and blackish-brown. His 9 eyes stare in a terrifying, wrathful gaze. His eyebrows quiver like lightning bolts. His fangs are bared and gleaming like copper, and he roars with laughter. His blazing red-gold hair streams skyward, etc. There's dozens of them. Those also, in exactly the same way, are manifestations of the mind. But what's happening is we're getting more and more alienated from reality. We fail to recognise the naked, clear white light at the beginning. Reality has, as it were, tried to reach towards us with things like, okay, here's a very, very subtle refraction of that into form for Rochana. We fail to recognise that, and so on. What's starting to happen now, that they're wearing skull garlands and fangs, and they're eating corpses. It doesn't just describe what they look like; it describes what they're doing in the charnel ground, which is not pretty. Is also a manifestation of the mind, but in its more alienated, angry, fearful aspect, as we become more and more divorced from reality. Does that make sense? So reality is now starting to make more and more noise to try and get our attention and try and wake us up. A bit like, I think, a nightmare. Sometimes you can have very refined dreams, can't you? Occasionally just have a really, really beautiful dream. And maybe that's equivalent to one of these figures. Something from within your own mind, but if you like, beyond your control, manifests to you and tells you something, if only we could understand it, about the life of the mind. It feels like it comes from beyond us, doesn't it? They're such an unusual sort of gift when it goes well, a dream, because it's unbidden. I know a retreat leader who, instead of in retreat groups going around saying how you are on each day of the retreat, just gets people to talk about their dreams, because you can't curate it. And even if people start the retreat saying, oh, I don't have any dreams, or the dreams are boring, by day 2 or 3, especially listening to other people tell their dreams, they're starting to have massive dreams. And you tell them it's really quite funny and really quite illuminating. And instead of saying, I'm this type of guy and I didn't sleep well, and, you just say, well, there were loads of rats and cats in my bed and they kept multiplying. And everyone's like, right. And then it's someone else's turn. That was my dream on Saturday night, actually. Lots of animals, they were sort of sprouting more of themselves. It was weird. And you can have a nightmare, can't you? And when you wake up, you think, crikey, I, in a sense, created that. And did I exactly? What is that I that I think this has come from? Because I didn't push a button saying, give me a horrible dream about cats and rats multiplying in my very own bed. It came from somewhere. Dreams are probably one of the best hints or analogies for what the Book of the Dead really might be. I said earlier in the course that it sounds very culturally specific and there's all sorts of images and they might not be very familiar. Even Varochana perhaps isn't very familiar to some of you. However, we all know that there's an imagination, and we all know that the imagination can actually take flight on its own and do things that we haven't asked it to do. So I would say that those wrathful forms, and if you read all this, I was on a retreat this recently, reading all these things out, it can almost start to sound funny. There's so many different yoginis tearing corpses apart with their claws and drinking blood and cackling and, coming at you. If you see what I mean, it starts to sound slightly ridiculous, partly because it's medieval, it's Tibetan, that's how they imagined it. But actually, the more serious point is, this is what the horrified imagination is imaging itself as. So I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this, but if you, if an image of something horrific passes into your mind for whatever reason, sometimes it can stick to your mind a bit and can start repeating itself, including when you don't want it to. My own understanding of that is that we all have a horrified imagination somewhere, or the imagination is, I don't know, probably very deep and very high. But at its lower end, it has the potential to become horrified. If it latches onto an image, it's got a way to connect with you. Because a lot of the rest of the time, it's probably doing something murky and a bit out of sight. If it can show you a horrible image that you find frightening and keep repeating, my own sense of that is that what's happened is it's got a way to grab your attention. And if you're practicing awareness, practicing Buddhism meditation, you can say to yourself, that is a thought. It's produced from my own mind. Perhaps it's like the nature of a dream. When I wake up from it, it's not there. If I get distracted from it, someone comes in and speaks to me, I actually can't remember what I was thinking about. So what substance does it have exactly? It's not solid. And you can reflect, if you like, that the whole of life has qualities like that. Okay, I'll start winding up in a minute, but let's just see, again, if you've got anything you want to ask, particularly about what I've said.
I don't know if this is a question, but I'm really shocked because I was just thinking while you were speaking about this, that why is it getting harder if you're supposed to, like, you know, if it is there. Sorry guys, I'm a bit
That's okay.
overwhelmed.
Yeah.
If we are too afraid to understand, why is it getting uglier? Then in my head I was like, it's not that they are getting uglier and they're making it harder for you. It's because you are afraid and you're going down, it gets uglier, you know. It is literally what you said. It's just it's overwhelmingly beautiful, that it is just if we manage to understand that and not be afraid of it, it's not frightening. It's like the dreams, as you said, we build them.
Yeah.
And it is a bit overwhelming because I was writing about a dream I had last night I was sitting in that corner, and now you're just talking about dreams, and it started like a nightmare.
Right.
But then it became beautiful.
Okay.
Because I was telling someone not to be afraid because these are not. It's just crazy how.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share because it's unbelievably beautiful.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. It's very strong. It's very strong stuff, this, and I'd agree that the experience it's inviting us into is a very kind of essential one. It's a lot to take in, but it sounds as if, you're hinting there at the potential that's in it, which is that in the worst moments there is actually something beautiful and uplifting that can happen if we can train to recognise that with the mind. So what we're doing with this practice, which probably, needs lots and lots of friendliness and open-heartedness and metta, is training to recognise the real truth when it arises, when it emerges. So fear, I think, is one of the most difficult things to deal with. And what the tradition is challenging us to recognise is that beyond that, or in some sense within it, is the complete gold or the complete white light of the most beautiful thing that we can imagine. But the message of the book overall is that if we become more and more familiar with the nature of reality through images that we can train ourselves to love and adore and be drawn towards, we'll grow in those moments of the crucial situation.
Is the book's account of what happens at death supposed to be what happens to everyone regardless of your religion? In which case, we as Buddhists are training ourselves to try and recognise this light, and then to try and recognise the Buddhas and to go towards the Buddhas rather than dark, murky lights. And if it's hard for us as Buddhists to ever achieve that, then what hope does anyone else in the world have that might associate with other faiths?
I think it's universal. Even if you say put aside.
Yeah, it's hard to say actually, because like I say, it looks culturally specific. I think its real message is that there's always the potential to recognise more reality. With the Buddha forms, they may not look like that as well when it comes to it. I think the inspired imagination of the Buddhist tradition has said, imagine that it's like this, or even train yourself to recognise this. And, you know, those of us who've joined the order and taken on visualisation practices of particular Buddhas might have moments in our day-to-day life where we get a little subtle sense that something of reality, perhaps even through that form, is reaching towards us, and that could even be somebody's experience of colour or light, or seeming to be a little bit more in touch with something beautiful that they've rehearsed in their mind, if you see what I mean. So I'm not sure it actually looks like something when it comes to it. It's more that I think the whole message is that the mind has got potentials much, much greater than we usually imagine, and that in moments of what Bhante calls at least the crucial situation, more of that potential will open up. The main message of Bardo, or the main meaning of Bardo, is that possibilities open up, if you see what I mean. You know, this text seems to be saying the ultimate instance of that is at death, but again, it could be at any time that more light, more reality manifests. Does that make sense? Yeah. But I think the reason to keep going with these images in this sequence is to become more and more familiar with that. Yeah. It's just.
Is there any particular reason, because you mentioned that the 5 Buddhas would appear, is there any reason why Vajrasattva is not included in the 5 Buddhas?
Yeah, good question. Any reason Vajrasattva is not included? Why he's not in the 5 Buddha mandala? Yes, I'm going to ask Kusasara if she knows more about this as well. But Akshobhya, the next Buddha that's mentioned, is known in the book as Vajrasattva Akshobhya. And I think that Sangharakshita says that for the purposes of this sequence they're kind of merged, but I'm not exactly sure. Kusasara, do you know more about Vajrasattva?
I think it's just the 5 Buddha mandala comes in like slightly different forms sometimes.
Right.
And Vajrasattva, Bodhisattva. Anyway, I don't think he features in this system. And there are some other Buddhas at the start. Some Vajra, some Vajra. Anyway, it's too much detail.
That's all right. Yeah, thank you. So I think the main thing to remember is that the mind, like I say, has this huge potentials, and sometimes those are broken open a bit more. We'll see more of our own imagination. The real training is saying, whatever happens, I undertake to understand as the nature of my own mind. It's a very, very radical teaching, but one that we can train in day-to-day ways. So each time, we're in I mean this is going to sound trite now, in a bad mood in the morning or something, you can tell yourself, there's other potentials in the mind. This is my mind doing this. If you get into a habitual story about another person, this is a manifestation of my mind. If you get really struck by a beautiful sunset, you think, this is my mind. I don't mean the sunset over there equals my mind. That's the sort of near miss that's a bit delusive. It's more like, this is an arising in mind. The potential for arisings in mind is immense. And creative possibilities open up at every point if we know how to look for them. And there will always be a trend, to use the terms, that's more nirvanic, more towards enlightenment, or more samsaric, more towards samsara or the mundane world of the 6 realms. So it's not surprising, and we're not to be blamed for the fact that the 6 realms are what are familiar and comfortable. Being an animal, being a human, being a jealous god, being a pleasant god. Of course, we're probably going to go towards that. Probably in our day-to-day moments, we keep choosing to go towards those. It's quite natural to want comfort and reassurance. Familiarity, ultimately, is what this is about. When things get really unfamiliar, the challenge goes way up and the potential for creativity goes way up. That's basically what's being said. Okay. So sorry that there's not time for more, but it feels particularly appropriate tonight to finish with a mantra, which we've been doing. So we'll chant the Padmasambhava mantra. We've been doing that because Padmasambhava is thought originally to have spoken out the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or left it as a teaching for us to find. So we'll invoke Padmasambhava a little bit, let that fade, and I'll ring a bell for the end.
It's my favourite.
Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hum. 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 Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padmasambhava Om Ahum Vajraguru Padmasambhava Om. Okay, so thanks for being here. We've got one more week left. Kusasara will talk more about how to choose that enlightenment possibility next week and get off the wheel more definitively. So I know this week is strong stuff, so stay with us for one more week and we'll be even better equipped for the journey. Yeah, very good to see you all.